All right, to get my sample ready for the slip stitch sample, I've got 2 of my rectangles and I'm going to put them pretty sides together, pretty sides touching. It says that you'll need to use a seam gauge, which is this tool right here. This has a little slider in the middle to help you measure your seam allowances. The instructions say to choose a long edge and to place a mark at 2 inches and 4 inches down the long edge. So I'm going to take my seam gauge and I'm going to slide this little marker down to 2 inches. I'm going to place it on the edge of my fabric and I'm going to take one of my marking pens and I'm just going to put a mark right on the fabric. These marks will wash out or will iron out, so don't worry about it being there. But again, it's just your sample book, so it doesn't matter that much. So I have a mark at 2 inches. Now I need to make a mark at 4 inches. So I'm going to slide the slider down to 4 inches, place it back on the edge, and then place a mark at 4 inches. I'll put the lid back on my marking pen so it doesn't dry out, and when I look at this, you'll now see that we have 2 marks placed down the long edge. When we go over to our sewing machine, we're going to sew from the top to the mark, and then from the second mark to the bottom, and I'll show you how to do that next. For the next step of our slip stitch or blind stitch sample, we've got it all marked. Now we're ready to sew it. You do need to sew part of this on the machine. We're going to leave this opening between the marks open so that we can learn how to slip stitch or hand sew at the end. So the instructions tell us we're going to sew a 5/8 inch seam. We're going to sew from the top to the first mark and then from the second mark to the bottom. Make sure you backstitch 4 places, at the top, at the mark, at the mark, at the bottom. So we're going to put this in, and it's just like a regular 5/8 inch seam that we've been working on, but this time we're going to stop at the mark. So we're going to backstitch, and we're going to go down to the first mark, and we're going to backstitch there. Then we're going to take it out, and we're going to trim our threads. We're going to trim them there, and on each side here where the mark is. Now when I put this back in, you can see here's my first line. I'm going to start sewing at the second mark. So I just put it in just like normal, but this time instead of starting at the top edge, I'm going to move it down until I start right where that mark is. So then I start, I backstitch, and I go to the edge. And I backstitch at that edge. Once again, I'm going to trim my threads before moving on at the end and where that mark is. I'm going to trim that little guy off. So now you can see my sample here. I have the sewing line here and here, but I've left this section open. Next step says to go to the iron and press it open just like we did our first one. So we're going to press the seam allowance open, but then we're going to get ready and we're going to hand sew this opening shut right here in the middle. All right, the next step in our slip stitch is to press our seam open. So just like our first one, our 5/8 inch seam, we're going to press this open. The only difference is that there is an opening in the middle. So take your seam allowance, open it up, and then use your iron to press it completely flat so that it'll make the slip stitching a little bit easier. So once it's all pressed, you'll see that there is the opening right here in the middle. We're going to learn how to hand sew that shut next. All right, we are ready to do our slip stitch, our hand sewing stitch. You should have taken your sample over to the iron and pressed it open so that it has the seam allowances open and it should have this opening in the middle. You're also going to need your thread, a hand needle, and some shears. So first thing we got to do is get our needle threaded. So we're going to get some thread about a little less than an arm's length. You don't need very much. Kind of snip the end there. And we're going to thread our needle. All right, and if you need help threading your needle, I do have some needle threaders. So now we're going to take the needle and we're going to take the thread and fold it in half all the way down. So you should have 2 pieces of thread touching each other with the needle at the end, and then we're going to tie a knot. We're going to tie these 2 ends together. A cool trick that my grandma taught me is if you take the thread and you wrap it around your finger like this, make a little X, Put your thumb over the X and then kind of twist it off your fingertip and then ball it up, kind of wiggle it around in your fingers, and then use your fingernail to quickly pull the knot down to the end. Now this makes kind of a big knot, but for our sample book it doesn't really matter, and plus it's going to be on the wrong side anyway. If you don't know how to do that one, you can always tie a knot however you want to tie a knot. So now we're going to take our needle and we're going to do our slip stitch. If you are right-handed, you're going to work from right to left. Lefties are going to work from left to right. We want to hide our knot on the wrong side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the needle and kind of open up the opening here and stick the needle behind the last stitch that I did on the machine, right on that back stitch, right kind of in the stitch ditch right there. And what that'll do is it'll pull it through, and as I tug on it, my knot will stop and get caught in the back. Okay, so now what I recommend is if you're a right-hander, you're going to go from right to left, and because I'm a righty, I'm going to go right to left. Take your sample and fold it in half right along the stitch ditch like this, right along the crease. Use your left hand or your opposite hand and pinch together with your pointer finger and your thumb right where you're sewing. All right, we're going to take the needle and I'm going to stick the needle in, over, and out, but only through the top fold of my fabric. So see, if I open this up, I have a top fold and I have a bottom fold. My needle right now is only going in the top fold of fabric. So I'm going to pull it through. Now where I came out on the top, I'm going to go in on the bottom, right here, in the bottom fold. So I'm going to go in, over, out. Only through the bottom fold. Then I pull it through. Make sure all the threads don't have any loops or anything. Now I'm just working my way across. Top, bottom, top, bottom, top, bottom. So I ended on the bottom. Now I'm going to go back to the top. In, over, out. Where I came out on the top, I'm going to go in on the bottom. In, over, out. Every once in a while you want to make sure that your threads are kind of tugged together, and if you look and I open this up, you should not be able to see any of your thread. But if I were to pull this apart, you could see the thread in between there going back and forth and back and forth. So make sure every once in a while you pull your thread together and see how that just pulls it right together. All right, so let's hurry and finish this. Keep it folded in half. We're going to go to the top fold, in, over, out. And make sure your stitches aren't too big, because if your stitches are big, then the holes left behind are big, and the whole purpose is to close this opening. In, over, out, all the way across. Top, bottom, top, bottom, top, bottom. So as you work your way across, make sure your threads kind of get tugged into place, and that they aren't showing at the end. Okay, it looks like I got about one more stitch till I'm done. All right, kind of pull on those threads. Now I need to tie a knot, and to do so I want to hide my knot on the wrong side again. So I'm going to take my needle, put it down to the wrong side, pull my thread all the way through the back, and then turn it over. Now I'm going to make my knot. So I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to go down and back up around one of the stitches, the back stitches on that end. So I'm right in the stitch ditch, I go down and then back up. Before I pull it all the way through, leave a little loop, go through the loop, and then pull it tight, and that's where it'll make my knot right there. Now I'm going to clip my thread, but I'm going to leave a little tail where my thread is so that it doesn't come undone. So if I look at my sample, my knots are both on the wrong side, but when I turn it over to the right side, I can see that my fabric is joined together with an invisible stitch. So now all you got to do is press it one more time and staple it into your book, and that one's finished. All right, when you staple your slip stitch sample in, make sure that the right side is up. Staple once, twice, just along the top edge so that I can lift it up and down.